So how I interpreted was the same way Jody just reported on, that it was, we took a vote to have it as a placeholder, and then we were charged with potentially developing some guidelines for the Constitution Committee to write up language. However, I also recall at the very last meeting that the charge was for us to go back to our departments, discuss with our department members, programs, whatever, how, their reaction to this new, if you want to call it a track or rank, professor in practice was. And I personally, we have had no discussion in our department yet on this because of how our meetings fell. So I don't have any feedback from my colleagues, and I think Rich, you can attest to that. I don't know how many other people do because of the timing of that. So I don't even, all I can do is speak to what I've looked at, but I don't know what they're thinking of in terms of how, and I think the charge is to see how useful it might be within our own program, because for some in the fine arts it seems very useful, and maybe in business or something, but in other programs not as useful. And so we haven't had that discussion. And I don't mean it as an excuse. I don't feel comfortable taking some stand on something where I don't know what the faculty actually even know about this. And I think it's a very important issue because it does create another non-tenure track faculty, whatever you want to call it, track. I think the faculty need to kind of get their heads around that. It can't just be me representing me. So I don't know how many other faculty were able to take it to their departments and actually have some meaningful discussion about would this be useful for us, and do we see this as an advantage for our program or a disadvantage?
We talked about it in our department, and on the meeting on June 2nd, 4 different people chimed in and talked about the advantages in their department. But that wasn't what I wanted to talk about. I want to make sure we all agree that the Senate voted to charge the Constitution Committee with developing the language for this position, right? That's clear. Nobody's unclear about that. So what's going on now is Pete, as a representative of the Constitution Committee, is asking for feedback from us now, about creating this position. So we're not arguing the merits of the position, nor whether we should. We're not arguing the merits of the position. We're helping Pete define the position because we have already passed a motion to charge the Constitution Committee with creating this position, with defining, this position. Is there anything wrong with what I said? We did vote on June the 2nd to, quote, move that we approve the professor of practice rank and charge the Constitution Committee with further defining the rank. That's been done. So, I don't understand why we're changing the argument to whether or not the position should exist. We're just trying to help Pete define the position because we already charged him, or his committee, with the task of defining the position. Unless I'm missing something.
That's not my understanding. My understanding was, and I don't want to misrepresent Jody, but I recall Jody saying something that the times in which that position, and it was before I was even on set, the professor of practice idea came about, there were different circumstances that were kind of pushing for Senate to take up that possibility of this new track, whatever you want to call it, and that those things don't necessarily still exist. And so the interpretation was, and from those minutes that you stated, it was a placeholder, that you could do nothing about it right now, or possibility of, fleshing it out. And that we don't have to go with it, and I'm not suggesting we don't, I just think there does need to be some more deliberate, full faculty deliberation on the consequences of doing it. And it's not like to slow it down, it's just to kind of better understand what are the repercussions of doing a non-tenure track line, or track, or whatever you want to call it, for our institution.
I was just going to say to cut to the chase, Carol, I actually agree with you entirely. However, Brian is correct as far as I'm staring at the minutes from June 2nd. It says exactly what he says it says. So I think unless there's something in the videotape that somehow ameliorates that or then that's what we have to go with. That we have already approved professor of practice. Now we're working on the details. Now we could say, I don't like that Constitution language. Just throw out that language and start over or whatever. But we have approved the rank, according to minutes at least.
And for this idea of things changing, are you referring to things changing since we voted for this on June the 2nd?
No, for the original discussion.
But we voted on June the 2nd, and it was approved at that point. We charged the Constitution Committee at that point. So isn't the only relevant changes the changes from June the 2nd till today?
Well, I still think that the rest of the faculty need to understand the implications of this. And I would appreciate, as a senator, hearing feedback from my colleagues on whether this sounds like a viable option for different programs.
So you're saying we should have done that before we voted on June the 2nd?
Well, you should have, and I'm sorry that the language came out that way, but I wasn't around when the initial thing came up. I wasn't on Senate yet, so I'm slow on the uptake probably, but I didn't support the vote, so, okay, so that was my position then, and I go with, okay, the language of professor of practice is what, so you're saying that was, we approved it as a, what, as a rank?
Motion that we approve the rank of professor of practice and charge
We
Constitution.
did not define anything about it.
No, we did not.
And then.
So that discussion still has yet to
Right,
take place.
and in December's meeting of this year, we said we have to take it back to our faculty. We suggested that we do that, to have that discussion, because it has ramifications on many things. So, I'm just saying, I don't feel like I have enough information. And that's why I would recommend people read this AAUP report.
Amy.
And I apologize that I was not here in the fall quarter, but could you clarify, when we approved the position of practice, were there any other aspects that were approved in addition to, for example, how it differs from the professional track, or how, so is that part, was that part of the approval?
It does not look like that from the minutes. There was some mention about details first from the CBA. The salary information is in the CBA, so that's not controlled by the Constitution. And then it talks about some assumptions that were made about what would happen.
But
But
how
those,
does it differ? I mean, did we really tease out how it differs other than in language?
in a general, only in a general sense was my memory. But we still have to work those details out.
So those haven't been worked out yet.
I don't.
So we just approved a new title, but without really any
Right.
Well, and I think this whole issue around, is it something that we appoint people to, or do we do a search?
Well, and how does it differ
Is
than
a
what we
very
already
critical
have?
piece of that as well. I mean, you know, Brian, your understanding was that you just get appointed to it.
Not necessarily. I was just told that in my specific case.
Right. Right, in your specific case.
My specific
And then
case.
on the other side, there's this search, and then my question is, if we, you know, as a department, if we see a place for a professor of practice, then we have to provide substantiation for that.
Sure.
And move forward like, you know, we want this. So
Right.
that gets back to, do we want to create a non-tenure position within the department instead of a tenure track one? So that's kind of at the roots of that
Sure.
to some extent. Yeah, it is.
And the one other thing I wanted to add, sorry, is it my turn?
Yes, yes.
Is when we had that specific vote on the 2nd, there was some discussion before it, I think in the 3 meetings before it. And so there were we did discuss this. People went back, people talked and brought stuff back. The specific quotes from Dave, he said that in his view, this person would take on much of the roles and responsibilities of a professor without a terminal degree, with vast experience in the field or with the material. Basically would have the same types of requirements of professor minus $2,000 for a terminal degree. And then somebody asked, well, what would be the difference between professional, or professor of practice? And Dave responded with, there would be lower ELU, but otherwise aligned with professor. There would be service and scholarship, also aligned with professorial terms.
So it's,
Okay, there was not, I remember that when I wrote it down. So,
but that wasn't part of the approval?
no, that was just some discussion about, some people did talk, I think, within their own program, but there was never anything concrete spelled out about, and there was even argument in December, in our December meeting about, is it scholarship, is there a scholarship requirement for that position? Some people were saying yes, and then other people said, no, that wasn't the original intent, and then it was like, that was community service, and then So, I mean, there are a lot of factors that really need to be worked out and how they impact the larger picture rather than just for an individual. I mean, I'm concerned, there's already people on this campus that have professorial appointments that don't have a terminal degree because of the nature of their discipline. Am I mistaken about this? Like, in the fine arts thing, so they're in professorial tracks, but because of their discipline, they don't necessarily have PhDs.
Well, terminal degree in the arts is an MFA.
Right, so that's a terminal degree in their area, but that's why this is different, because it's no terminal degree in your area of expertise, but the outside experience is what was driving it, correct? But, I don't know, I mean, I just think there's lots of ramifications that we haven't thought through all the way. And I'm not saying I'm opposed to it, I just want to have other feedback. I need to hear from my colleagues, and I haven't gotten that yet.
Okay, so let's
I
see.
don't know, maybe I'm the exception, maybe everybody else has heard from everybody.
Okay, so Dennis and Liz and then Deborah.
I wasn't here June 2nd either, so none of this is my fault. But it seems like we're kind of all in the same place, sort of talking around all the same issues. It seems this is what we have to flesh out and have come forward. So how do we move this forward? I mean, it's a great discussion, but we've agreed that we're going to have this item. We just haven't spelled out what this item is going to be. So whose responsibility is that, just out of curiosity?
It's our responsibility.
Right.
It's the Constitution Committee's responsibility to create a draft. And so I'm trying to get some questions answered here for our creation of the draft. And there is an open question around scholarship, and there's a way that we could answer that. We could say the position may or may not have scholarship, and leave it open to the department that's doing that proposed position to make the decision. That is a possibility. There are other possibilities as well. I'm also trying to flesh out what we need to do in the bylaws. So I've got one more question about that. It looks to me, since this is a new rank or track, to John's word, but a new, a third, what the OERs call rank, we would need I think we'd need a whole new section similar to 5225 for professor of practice.
Pete, can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
Because what I'm at a disadvantage of here is I'm not seeing what you're seeing. And I almost, maybe I should have, am I supposed to have it in front of me?
No.
Okay, so somehow we need something, I think we need to move this so that we can have on a piece of paper, here's the things that here's the inventory, not to be accounting like, here's the things that we have, that we know it has to be, and here are the things that we still have to answer. Because I think it's a good discussion, but I think we need to focus it in. And then that's where we start getting this thing so that we can do what Carol wants, which is a good suggestion, taking it back to our departments in order to flesh out how they feel about this. So we're kind of mid-process of this right now.
For that definition.
Let's see, Elizabeth?
Yeah. I was just going to say that I think we need to really think about how the professional and professorial tracks relate to one another and how this position fits in there. Because we have plenty of people who are instructors or senior instructors who do have terminal degrees in areas. And so when we think about credentialing across the university, we have to think about what that credentialing really means and what those duties are within those particular tracks. And I don't think that we have. Secondly, I appreciate Brian's enthusiasm, but we also have to think beyond just one position for one person at the present. I realize we have a vested interest in this, but we have to think about the whole university, right? And I agree with you, Carol, as we look at different departments, some departments may have a need for this where others may not, but we don't even know what that would be because we don't know any of the duties of that particular position, whether it would be a transitional position or professorial or not. I have read that same report that you have there, and there are some problems that may come up later depending on your orientation to tenure and what you think about academic credibility and credentialing at the university level. So I think we need to think about it in the broadest sense, not just for individual positions.
I did take it back to my faculty, because it is, as identified, this is a great thing in the arts, kind of across the arts. There's a couple of colleagues I can think of right now who, one doesn't want tenure, feels bound by tenure, and would love to be a professor of practice, because that would just suit, again, an individual, but suit what that person does. What I recall from the last meeting was we were supposed to go back and ask our departments what sort of scholarship would be required in each of our areas. And it's really quite different. Obviously, a pottery professor needs different credentials and different experience than a theater movement professor, for instance. So I think it does get incredibly specific down to people. But again, our 2 cents is it's really valuable in the arts. It would free up a lot of angst.
Really? Even though they realize that we have less job security.
Yes, but in the great scheme of things, what is job security?
Oh, yes, Rich.
To respond to that, I'm sorry, intelligently, for some people in that particular situation, they prefer not to have, job security is not an issue,
Right.
because they won't be with us for very long. They're doing a very specific kind of thing for a specific amount of time.
I think we should
And they
entertain
prefer,
a
in fact,
motion to
the non-academic flexibility to kind
ask
of go in a different direction.
Constitution Committee to come up with a draft, so that we don't just keep doing this.
So should we circulate this draft of proposed language with questions or alternatives as you read through it and solicit comments via email? Would that be, yeah. Would that be a way to focus in-person discussion?
I second the motion.
Yeah. And so, once again, the idea is to have you come up with this draft so we could look, so we'll have it to look at, and that we're going to go back to our programs.
We have that actually. On 11/29, Larry sent that out to everyone on Senate, and his copy, his Word document that came straight from people. So we've all received that.
Well, we sent a draft, yeah.
And it's got your questions in there.
It has the questions that we had at that time.
Are they different questions now?
Yeah, we've got some additional ones.
Okay, so
Yeah, I'd like Mark to submit, take that draft that Brian did and share his original language that was up at that Dave sent, and write another draft. There's a lot of new language that needs to go into the bylaws. We need a whole new section. We need eventually, if somebody's going to be somebody's going to be hired under this, we're going to need departmental expectations for professor of practice, and how those relate to community service. There's a whole ton of language. Frankly, I was trying to get out of trying to write that much language. But we'll give it a shot and produce another draft.
I wanted to, well, one comment, I mean, interrupt the motion, but I do think that some of this is going to play into the task force that's working on the workload of all of us here, because, I mean, we could argue we haven't really defined the duties of a professorial faculty member in any real, defined way, and that'll give us hopefully language that we can then leverage in professor practice. But of course, that would set that back several months, that process that we waited. But I did want to ask for a friendly amendment to your motion, and that is that could we identify in the draft which things are dictated by the OARs, which things we've already voted on? I mean, are there aspects of it that we've already agreed that we're going to do? And then which things are just things that Sherry came up with or, individuals came up with? Because I'm very confused, because I always thought there was no scholarship component. Now I'm hearing there is a scholarship component, and I don't know. I mean,
The OARs say may or may not.
well, that's what I mean. That's what I'd like to see is in the draft. I don't know how you would do that, indicate that, but what things are set in stone and which things are we actually open to discussing?
And to that, OIRs are gone soon too, right? So
Yeah, I know, but at least right now,
But
right,
we will have administrative rules, so
Right.
we'll have something that represents, yeah.
At the risk of talking too much, just to respond, I totally agree this shouldn't happen for one person. I'm completely on board, and I think that's a good point. My only concern is that this be framed in how can we help with the Constitution Committee define this position, and not the argument whether or not to have this position, because I firmly believe that's already been decided in the vote. That's all I was trying to see.
So we've got a motion on the floor.
What is the motion? I don't even know what it is right now.
Let's,
Oh,
That
I
might be fun.
guess. Okay, I guess I move that the Constitution Committee would, revise this draft language and, send it to Senate for comments via email.
that sounds good.
Second.
And then, bring possibly a more focused discussion.
Second.
And so that way we can take it to our program. Get some
Third.
feedback.
So
too.
once we have that discussion,
Always
just so I
was.
understand the process, once we have that discussion, then we would take what comes out of that discussion to our department.
We should have some kind of
Something, I
some
agree,
kind
I
of
didn't know
a
what to tell my department, so I didn't.
profile of what this is gonna look like
Right.
Okay,
for
Or it could
discussion.
look like.
Yeah, it could look like, and then there should be further discussion in the departments.
all right.
You're
That's a
supposed to
better.
call for a vote on the motion, and then we can have further discussion.
Sorry.
The motion has been made and seconded. You need to call for a
Oh.
second,
Second.
for a vote, and then we can have further discussion.
All right, so I'll call the vote now. Those in favor, the aye.
Uh,
Those opposed? Those abstaining?
Because we're gonna talk about
Okay, so we got,
That's how it was.
okay,
Sorry.
Yeah, for the motion.
did you get the four abstains? Carol, Pete, Deb, and Rich. All right, I believe that passes.
You vote between the second and the vote. is what you do.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not sure we had discussion between the second and the vote.
Oh, yeah, discussion.
I don't know. I mean,
Well, we did a lot of
I'm just saying
discussing.
that It was a rather unique move from my point of view, but it works.
Do we have a timeframe, being on the Constitution Committee, that we're supposed to come up with a revised draft and to ensure the information? Do you want?
Yeah,
Yeah, we, tomorrow,
Yeah.
a
Maybe-
timely manner.
Maybe later on tonight, between the third and fourth quarter.
Yeah.
All right.
I don't know.
You're open. Yeah, I'm open for that, yes, but hopefully not too long. Well, I believe that concludes our business. Hey, we beat 5:30.
All right, I gotta find it on the radio.